Okay, let's maybe unpack this a bit. When you hear Viking, what's the first thing, like the image that jumps into your head?
Oh, it's almost always the same, isn't it?
Yeah, probably the horned helmet, right?
Yeah.
Big axe.
Exactly. Or maybe, those long ships raiding some poor village. It's dramatic stuff.
Super dramatic and really powerful. That image has stuck around for, well, centuries.
It really has, and you can understand why, given the terror they inspired sometimes. But the thing is, when you start digging, you find that picture. Well, it's got truth in it, but it's way too narrow.
Just one slice of the pie.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
A much, much bigger story underneath.
And that is exactly what we want to dive into today. We're trying to get past that, that single fearsome image, find out who the Norse people of the Viking Age actually were.
Yeah, and we've been looking at this really interesting source, the Vikings. Beyond Myth and Marauders, which it gives such a great sort of multi-layered view.
Pulls together archaeology, the sagas, history.
All of it. So our mission really, for you listening, is to use that source material to get past the stereotype. Get a feel for the more complete, the more human, and honestly, often quite surprising reality of this culture.
I'm actually really excited to peel back those layers. It feels like, finally seeing the people behind the whole horned helmet legend.
It's a fascinating journey.
So, ready to go beyond the myth with us? Let's dive in.
Okay.
So, I guess to really understand the Vikings, we need to start with where they came from, right? Scandinavia, say, 8th to 11th centuries.
Exactly. And you gotta picture it. It's beautiful, no doubt, fjords, forests, all that, but also really challenging.
Harsh.
Very harsh. The source really emphasizes those long winters, and critically, not a whole lot of land you could easily farm.
So survival was tough.
It demanded incredible resilience day in, day out. These people we end up calling Vikings, they started as farmers, hunters, fishers, skilled craftspeople. Life was tied to the seasons, the land, the sea.
And politically, not one big empire.
Oh no, not initially. More like a patchwork, really. Local areas, local chieftains holding power, decentralized.
Right, so scattered communities just trying to make ends meet in a difficult landscape.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it then? What was the spark that made some of them take to the seas and become, Vikings?
Well, the source points to a few key things coming together. There was definitely desperation building up in some places.
With population pressure.
Yeah, populations grew, and suddenly there just wasn't enough good land to go around. Plus, you had inheritance laws often favoring, say, the eldest son.
Leaving younger sons with not much.
Exactly. Very few options at home. So for some, it really was about survival, finding somewhere else.
But it wasn't just desperation, was it?
No, definitely not. There was huge ambition, too. The lure of wealth, of gaining honor and status you couldn't get back in your village, maybe escaping local squabbles or duties.
So the sea becomes this escape route.
It becomes this pathway. Yeah, an escape route, but also a road to, opportunity, maybe even freedom, destiny, you could say.
And you can't talk about that pathway without talking of the ships, the long ship, which I think we often just see as a weapon. But the source suggests it was way more than that.
Oh, absolutely. It was the engine, really, of the whole Viking Age. The source calls them technical marvels, and they were.
How so?
Well, think about the design. Super sleek, light, but strong. And that shallow hull was key.
So they could go rivers.
Exactly. Shallow rivers, far inland, but also handle the open ocean. Fast under that single square sail gave them incredible versatility.
Meaning they could just appear almost anywhere.
Seemingly out of nowhere, yeah,
Okay.
and vanish just as quickly. But beyond the tech, these ships were symbolic, right?
Of possibility.
Yeah, possibility, ticket to the unknown. Getting on one took serious courage. Real risk involved. The source really brings that home. The danger, the storms. Lots of people who sailed off just never came back.
Which really underlines how strong those push and pull factors, the desperation, the ambition must have been. But, and this is crucial, isn't it? The source makes a big point that most Norse people actually stayed put.
Absolutely essential point. While some were off a Viking, as they might have said, the vast majority were back in Scandinavia. Life went on. Farming, family, community, that was the core for most.
And it wasn't just men's work holding things together.
Not at all. The source really highlights the vital roles women played. They were managing complex households, farms, had real influence in things like arranging marriages. You see their strength reflected in the sagas, too.
So women were often the ones keeping the whole structure running back home.
Very much so. And their spiritual world, with Odin, Thor, Freyja, it wasn't just bedtime stories.
It was a way to make sense of things.
Yeah, a framework for understanding a pretty chaotic, unpredictable world, a world where fate felt very real. So you get this paradox, right? This tough, sometimes brutal world, but also one with room for intricate art, complex social rules, and this deep, deep desire for honor and being remembered.
Which kind of leads us to that moment, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The one that really burned the Viking image into Europe's memory. Lindisfarne.
Lindisfarne, 793. Yeah, the source paints that as a real shockwave. This monastery off the English coast, center of learning, peaceful, wealthy.
And then suddenly,
brutally attacked, terrifying speed, monks killed, treasure stolen, holy books destroyed. Just chaos.
And it wasn't just random violence, though. There was a logic.
Oh, definitely strategic. Calculated. Monasteries, churches, the source points out they were basically the undefended banks of the era.
Right. Lots of silver, gold, valuable stuff.
Exactly. And relatively easy targets, especially for people who didn't share the same religion, the same reverence for these places.
But here's the kicker, according to the source. That one raid, horrific as it was so profoundly shocking to the Christian world
that it got reported everywhere, instantly, by terrified monks and priests.
And that became the story.
That became the foundation myth, the origin story for the Viking as this purely monstrous, bloodthirsty figure. That specific, brutal image kind of blotted out everything else for centuries.
And even though that warrior image is so strong, the source really pushes us to see they were, well, more than just that. Many faces.
Yeah, it acknowledges the violence, absolutely. It doesn't shy away from it, but it argues hard against seeing them as only that. Lots of interactions weren't full-on raids. Sometimes it was more pragmatic.
Like demanding payment.
Right, demands for tribute, the Danegeld, it was called, or, selling their fighting skills. Norse warriors were hired as mercenaries by plenty of European rulers, so yes, warriors, but also extortionists and soldiers for hire.
And they weren't just taking stuff and leaving. They stuck around. They built things.
And this is so key to their actual impact. The source really digs into how they founded or contributed to major political entities elsewhere.
Like the Normans.
Exactly. In France, they settle, become the Normans, and, 1066 and all that follows in England completely changes British history.
And in the East.
The Russes. Norse traders and warriors were central to forming early Russian states along the river routes. And then Ireland, Dublin, Waterford, Limerick, major cities today started as Viking towns.
So a legacy way beyond just loot. City builders, state founders even.
Absolutely.
But people fought back, obviously. Europe didn't just roll over.
Oh, definitely not. You had organized resistance. Think Alfred the Great in England, building fortified towns, the Burrs. Lots of conflict, often framed, as Christian civilization versus pagan barbarism.
But the source says something interesting came out of that conflict, right? Mixing.
Yeah, this is where it gets really fascinating. Even hostile contact leads to exchange. Language, for instance. English soaked up loads of Norse words.
Like sky or law.
Things like that, yeah. Art styles blended, weapon designs influenced each other, and even faith, surprisingly.
How so?
Well, the source notes many Vikings eventually converted to Christianity. Maybe not always deep spiritual conviction at first.
More practical reasons.
Often, yeah. Strategic alliances, better trade opportunities, fitting in socially. So ideas, goods, beliefs, they started flowing back and forth between these colliding worlds.
So, moving past the warrior stereotype, the source really hammers home the importance of the merchant and the settler. It says commerce was just as central as conquest.
Maybe even more so in the long run. This is probably the most overlooked aspect. Vikings set up these incredibly extensive trade networks.
How expensive?
Think Scandinavia, connecting all the way down to Byzantium, Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire, and the huge Islamic caliphates in the Middle East, even reaching into Central Asia.
Wow, so truly global traders for their time.
Absolutely. They used big market towns like Hedeby and Birka in Scandinavia as hubs, and they mastered those river routes like the Volga, which plugged them into parts of the old Silk Roads.
What were they trading?
All sorts. Furs, valuable walrus, ivory, honey, iron tools and weapons, amber. And yeah, we have to mention slaves were a significant part of that trade too, tragically.
And we have accounts of this.
We do. The source mentions Arab chroniclers like Ahmad ibn Fatlan, who actually met and wrote about the Rus's traders he saw in the Volga. He describes their customs, their trade goods, gives us a picture beyond just fighting.
And they weren't just passing through, they settled down, really changed places.
Yeah, this is where their identity starts to shift, right? They weren't just visitors, they built homes, established permanent settlements, intermarried with local people.
Normandy again.
Normandy is the classic example, with Rollo getting land from the French king. His descendants become dukes, then conquer England. But also in Britain, huge Viking settlement influenced language, laws, how land was owned, even place names you still see today.
In Iceland, that's unique, isn't it?
Totally unique. Settled largely by Norse fleeing Norway, they founded Iceland and established the Althing around 930 CE. It's often called one of the world's earliest parliaments, a remarkable example of governance and lawmaking set up by these supposedly barbaric settlers.
Just incredible reach. And it went even further, didn't it? Across the Atlantic, Finland.
Yeah, an amazing chapter. Around the year 1000, so centuries before Columbus, these Norse explorers, guys like Leif Erikson, they actually reached North America.
And set up shop.
They established settlements, though short-lived, called the place Vinland. We think it was likely around Newfoundland in Canada.
And we know this isn't just legend.
Nope. Archaeology backs it up now. The site at Lance O'Meadows in Newfoundland has confirmed Norse buildings, artifacts, proof positive.
Didn't last long, you said.
No, the settlements didn't stick. But just getting there, it shows their incredible seafaring skill and just sheer daring. Their world really did stretch from, the edge of Asia to North America.
So you have centuries of this intense activity, raiding, trading, exploring, settling, transforming whole regions. But then the Viking Age, as we sort of define it, roughly 8th to late 11th century, it starts to fade. Why? What happened?
Well, it wasn't one thing, more like a convergence. A lot of it was internal changes back in Scandinavia itself.
Like what?
Power started consolidating. You get the emergence of stronger kingdoms. Denmark, Norway, Sweden. Kings gaining more central authority. And Christianity spreads, bringing its own structures, often allied with royal power, replacing that older chieftain system.
So the homelands were changing, becoming more like the rest of Europe.
Exactly. The very kinds of centralized states they used to raid were now forming back home. They were kind of being absorbed into the wider European medieval landscape.
And outside Scandinavia, things were changing too.
Yeah, Europe got better organized defensively, more fortified towns, stronger armies, cavalry tactics improved. Those easy pickings just weren't so easy anymore. Raiding became a lot riskier, less profitable.
So trade becomes the better option.
Increasingly, yes. Trade routes continued, but the whole raiding lifestyle gradually became less viable.
So the Vikings didn't just disappear.
Oh, not at all. The source is really clear on this. They evolved. The descendants of those early raiders became kings, dukes, knights, landowners. They integrated into the Christian societies they'd once terrorized.
And the ships.
The ships were still crucial, but increasingly used for trade, transport, regular travel, not just raiding. The distinct Viking identity, that raiding persona, it faded as they became part of these new medieval kingdoms.
But they left a mark. A lasting legacy we can still see.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere, really, in place names across Britain, northern France, Ireland, Russia. In our language, so many English words have Norse roots.
Law, literature.
Yep, legal traditions, landholding patterns, and of course the sagas, their own literature, which gives us such rich, though sometimes biased insights. From the early democratic ideas in Iceland's Althing to the massive impact of the Norman conquest, even down to, pop culture today with Thor and Loki, their story still echoes.
So wrapping things up then, this deep dive, guided by the source, it really leaves us with this strong sense of paradox, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The Vikings were, yes, capable of immense brutality, but also incredible craftspeople, poets, shrewd administrators.
Raiders who struck fear, but also explorers who pushed boundaries, builders of cities, creators of laws.
Driven by, desperation and hope in equal measure. They left destruction, yes, but they also built connections, trade routes, cultural exchange, linking up huge parts of the known world. Pagans who, in weird ways, helped spread Christianity. Fierce warriors who laid groundwork for stable government.
And the source makes it so clear that beneath the myth, beneath the violence, the voyages, these were human stories.
Just people. Navigating a really difficult world, trying to survive, chasing dreams, wanting to build something, wanting to be remembered.
That fundamental struggle, right, to live, to make your mark, maybe leave something behind.
And in that sense, maybe they're not so alien, not so different from people throughout history, or, well, even us now.
Which brings us to a final thought. something maybe for you to mull over, drawing from this whole discussion. Given how much that simple, popular Viking myth hides the complex, messy human reality, how often might the easy stories we tell ourselves about other groups in history, or even about things happening right now, be hiding a truth that's much more complicated, much more human, and maybe much more surprising?